Hello, welcome back to another of my monologues. Thanks for joining me. Do you still watch television? Are you somebody who, at the end of a long, hard day, you flop into your sofa and switch on the box and just enjoy whatever programming there is out there on you? Note the word programming. I don't watch the television. I don't have a television. I haven't had a television for over 5 years, maybe longer actually, probably 6 or 7 years. I can't remember having a television and sitting down and watching mainstream media. I have a computer, of course, and used to enjoy a few programs on the iPlayer back in the day, in the early days of it, really. But yes, it must be 7 or 8 years now since I've watched the television as a thing that I did at the end of the day, that you just sat down and flopped in and watched it. I don't get time, I suppose, is one thing. And also, I don't want the mainstream media telling me how to think. I used to have television, of course. I grew up with television back in the day of the 1970s and 80s. I remember in the 60s, my dad, who had a business that made aerials, he was very interested in this new technology. And we went from a black and white television set, which you had to get up and tune the UHF frequency into the different things. I remember the many times that we were holding up aerials to try and get a better signal, that Dad would go on the roof and arrange a new aerial that he'd designed or was testing. He didn't really, his business was more on other types of aerials, but he made his own TV aerials because he understood what the frequency needed. He knew where the transmitters were and he would point them. And it was a fascinating time. And then you had these programs come on, and I remember getting our first colour television set and sitting there proudly watching those old programs. And curiously now, I've noticed on my YouTube feed, many of these old 1970s programs that I used to watch popping up, things like The Professionals and Minder and Rising Damp and a whole load of other programs from that era. And even though we would sit and watch those programs, little did we know that even back then there was subtle programming. Of course, it was a big national programming campaign, and even more now. It seems to me, much more obvious of the agendas that are being pushed. You get I get people sending me clips from soap operas and various things where they're pushing certain narratives so that it becomes an everyday experience, even though it isn't. And we've all seen how the adverts have painted certain racial aspirations, let's say, and wiped out other racial people from those adverts, as if that is the norm in this country. And we get that on YouTube all the time, of course. But so television has been part of our life for over 100 years, hasn't it? Or at least coming up for 100 years, I suppose, very soon. But that's a very short span of human history. And we used to not have television. We used to not have radio. Radio's probably about 100 years old. And I do think that we've kind of embraced this screen time technology incredibly over the last, well, I suppose the last 50 years. And we now cannot do anything without looking at a screen. And those old ways, for century after century after century, in which people spoke, they went to the pub, they had a sing-song, they spent time on their own, in their heads, and reading, of course. You may think, well, that must have been terribly boring for them. But at the same time, I think also, because you didn't have some other stimulant coming in, it was probably self-assuring because you had to think things through. We were probably less dumb back then, even though we had the myriad of information coming to us all the time. We were probably more in tune with nature, well, certainly, and indeed ourselves and our fellow man, rather than somebody else creating a narrative for us to follow. But I'm not saying that television is all bad, because there clearly has been some good programmes, and it is quite nice to have a bit of a diversion from all the other things, your own little mini cinema in your room. And I say mini cinema as opposed to these massive, great big televisions that you see children sitting in front of as babysitters these days, which is very much the dangerous point of the programming message, in which children are coming, British children having American accents and expressing certain words with an Americanism, because there's so much of that. Not to say to any of the Americans out there that what you do is wrong or your accent is wrong. Of course, it's just, I guess the same would be the same if everybody in America was, say, watching German television or Japanese television or Chinese television, and that was wall to wall. You'd end up in America with a different type of accent or different slant on saying things. So television has a huge amount of influence. But I was interested to note a couple of stories. They're a bit old hat now, I think. But one was that the BBC decided that it looks like they're going to go online permanently and drop their terrestrial programmes. Which is interesting. And if they do that, presumably the other broadcasters will follow, or will they just switch off the transmitters and the other, Channel 4 and ITV and is Channel 5 still going? And whomever, Sky, will they continue, or will it all be online? Perhaps you'll need a brick card to access these things, digital identity, of course. And the other thing is that if they are going to be scrapping the TV licence, I noticed there was a story that suggests that actually this will be collected as part of the council tax. So that even though you may not have a television, and even though you don't want to watch the television, you're still paying for it if you pay for the council tax, which is an interesting conundrum for people to get their heads round. And on that front, I do get a lot of people asking me about the council tax, because particularly more so last year, we were looking at the fraudulent practice of the council tax and the fake courts that are done and the liability orders and all of that. And none of that seems to have changed. Bringing it out into the open as yet, I say, as yet, none of it's changed. That the scam is still being run by the councils, and they continually point to the Local Finance Act of 1992, don't they, to say this is where we get our power from, our authority to charge you this money. And I do wonder where the government themselves, who write these rules, who don't consult local people who live in an area, whether they want these rules to be in their council tax. It does seem to me that's a very strange anomaly, that if we need to have some form of governance, rules and regulations, that the local people in certain areas are not consulted. It does seem that legislation and all of that is this, again, heading towards a one world government type of ruling, and we know that from the 5G and the various other things, the net zero policies that we've all been told that we're having, and nobody in the area is being asked to do it. It does make me wonder what the good people of Biggleswick will do. By the way, the book is virtually finished now, and it will be coming out and be available for you guys to read if you're interested. But what would the good people of Biggleswick do if they're told that their TV licence, a licence which they're not very keen on, and perhaps they don't want to watch programmes that are hypnotising them and guiding their thoughts, that perhaps these people in Biggleswick want to be critical thinkers, use common sense, have their own judgment, and not be told how to think in the way that schools have trained up soldiers in the past, or good work people in the past, by lining them up in a uniform, and when the bell goes. Is it Pavlova's dog that was responding to the bell? I probably got that wrong, because I think pavlova is something you eat as a sweet. But anyway, whatever. It would be interesting to know what the good people of Biggleswick would do, and maybe that is partly in the book. Yeah, so to collect the money as part of the council tax, as part of another thing that you've not actually asked for, is a curious thing, especially if you don't want to watch the television. So are you somebody who sits back and thinks, oh, it's all poppycock, I'm quite happy to watch another episode of insert favourite programme here and just be influenced? Are you strong enough in mind and body to be able to resist whatever the narrative is? Or perhaps you're one of those people that says, well, I have to keep one eye on the mainstream narrative so I know what's coming down the pipe. I've only got one eye, so I don't want to put it on the mainstream narrative at all. And in fact, I watch so little now of screen time stuff because I read much more, and I spend time with my lovely girlfriend, the lovely Julia, and of course I'm writing my own stuff. And as much as I can, get out and enjoy nature and enjoy the world, and indeed my own thought processes. I allow my gut to come up with how I feel about certain things, rather than be manipulated by a bunch of people who think, yes, we need the population to think in this way. I try to stay as much as I can as independent in thought and mind as possible. And I'm sure that my gentle viewers sitting there may also do that, which is good. But I'd be interested in your comments about the idea that the TV licence is going to be collected, or potentially could be collected and linked to the council tax. And if the council tax is fraud, then everything related to it must also be fraud too, surely. Anyway, on that note, I will leave you to dwell. I have finishing flourishes to write on the Biggleswick story, and I will reflect on all of this myself. Until next time, thank you for watching, take care and enjoy yourself.